It's my pleasure to welcome to the program today Joseph Westphal, who's a senior fellow at the Wharton Leadership Program at the University of Pennsylvania, also former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, David, glad to be with you. And by the way, I'm a professor at the Lauder Institute at Wharton.
Okay, an important detail.
So we get credit for that.
So when it comes to, we've talked for a long time about the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. And I think that there's sometimes a simple understanding, which is there's a goal for shared stability in the region, often in connection with oil prices and the oil industry. Is it quite that simple, or how would you explain the history of the relationship?
No, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And the one thing you have to remember about Saudi Arabia is that U.S. public opinion, that is the average American, in Gallup polls after Gallup polls from the 1930s to today, to the latest polls, see Saudi Arabia in unfavorable terms. A majority of Americans think of Saudi Arabia in unfavorable ways.
Yes.
And that reflects back to the attitude that members of Congress then have to have because they get pressure from constituents. Some of that is because there's no knowledge. Saudi Arabia was closed until recently to the world. So Americans haven't traveled there, they haven't seen the country, they haven't visited, although many Saudis have come to the United States to study and to work here. So I think that lack of knowledge and that unfavorable rating play a big role. The other thing is, of course, that it is the birthplace of Islam. So you cannot ignore a country that hosts millions of people every year for religious services, and it has the kind of influence that they have around the world and have had for a long time. In addition to the fact that the region, for not just for oil, but for trade and for big nation, powerful nations, China, Russia, and others, has become a very important region where we're all competing.
Over the last, I don't know how many years. I mean, we can talk about the last 5 years, but it's really sort of been seeded earlier than that. There has been much made publicly of what seems to be a kind of liberalization in some sense in Saudi Arabia, arguably, at least to some degree, because of the direction that Mohammed bin Salman wants to see the country go. But at the same time, while publicly, we're hearing about women can now drive and some of these other things, we know about the sequestering of dozens of officials in a hotel in order to interrogate and sometimes make threats, and even much, much worse. So as from a diplomatic perspective, when one thing is happening publicly and yet very different things are happening privately, what are the conversations like between American diplomats and the leaders of the country? Do they talk about what's happening behind the scenes as much as they talk about what's happening publicly?
Well, it depends on which diplomat you're talking about.
Okay.
And that's a really, really good question because diplomacy really changed dramatically after the Obama administration. So when I left in 2017, in January, at the end of the Obama administration, none of the things you pointed out had happened.
Mm.
Mohammed bin Nayef was still the crown prince. I had excellent meetings with him, the king, and Mohammed bin Salman upon leaving. We had a great relationship. We worked on everything from their economic transformation plan, which MBS had put forth. We worked on security issues with Mohammed bin Nayef. We had a great relationship, extensive relationship, trying to deal with all of the regional issues in Syria, Iraq, and of course, Yemen. We were fully engaged as an embassy in almost every aspect of the relationship, or every aspect of their economy, education, energy, you name it, transportation, etc. We were involved. When I left in 2017, President Trump did not appoint an ambassador for 2 years.
Right.
And so the only diplomacy that was going on was between Pompeo, Secretary Pompeo, who would occasionally travel there, and Kushner. So there wasn't, the embassy was not empowered to work any of these issues and didn't have access. And of course, after I left, about a month or two after I left, MBS was able to get his father to depose MBN, Mohammed bin Nayef,
Right.
as crown prince, and he was named the crown prince. And then all the things that you mentioned started to happen. So I think, to answer your question briefly, and let me give you a chance to ask some more, diplomacy is critical, but you've got to be engaged holistically.
Now, when you were there, certainly you were aware, and there was this history of the public executions and so on and so forth. Does that get swept under the rug during diplomatic conversations about, for example, Yemen, or is that present in the room?
It did not get swept under by us.
Mm.
From President Obama to the Secretary of State Kerry to myself, and I'll just use myself as an example. Some ambassadors in some countries, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, others, would publicly criticize and publicly, be very negative about some of these practices early on when I first got there. I chose a different method. I chose the idea that we needed to help them make the right decisions, but not going public with them in order to have access and confidence from them in us, that we weren't going to, So I had the conversations with the king, with the crown prince, with the deputy crown prince about lashings, about beheadings, about executions, public executions, about the role of the Matawa, the religious police, who were increasingly becoming a real problem for them and especially for everybody else. And I was afraid that they were going to start, perhaps at some point, have attacking our foreign diplomats. So I was very straight with them that we weren't going to tolerate any of this stuff. It had to change, and it had to change because our relationship was so important.
Now, how do they react? I mean, do they write it off as, well, we just do things differently here than you do in the United States, or are they aware of how those practices are seen around the world?
Yes, absolutely. They especially MBS was then very keen on knowing what foreign press was saying about Saudi Arabia, about him, about their practices. So they were very well aware of that, and very well aware that our ability to support his plans for the economy, for transformation, for modernizing the country, depended on eliminating those ancient practices that he didn't agree with.
Right.
And were tolerated because there was still a very conservative element within Saudi Arabia's people who, I don't know if they demanded that, but they expected that. So when I went to talk to them about it, they got it and they took action, and they eliminated all those things. Matawa went back to their precincts. The lashings were terminated, and the president was saying the same thing in meetings with the king whenever he would come. He did 4 trips to Saudi Arabia. I was present at 3 of them. One was before I became ambassador.
Now, from much of what I've read, it's unclear. Well, I'll put it a different way. From what I've read, it's not clear to me whether the reasons that Mohammed bin Salman is taking these positions of, the reforms that you talked about and that I talked about, if it's because this is really what he believes, or rather it's because they've seemed to recognize that the oil industry may not be the best place to be solely focused in the future. There's this idea of diversifying the Saudi sovereign wealth fund. They need to be playing nice with London and New York and so on and so forth. And that it's really, just more of a strategic and financial decision. Like, what makes you think that Mohammed bin Salman really thinks these aren't good practices?
Well, when he would, again, when I was ambassador, he took some trips to the United States.
Yeah.
And in those trips, he met with everybody. He went to California. He met with the tech people. He met with Facebook people. He met with Bloomberg. He met with dozens of people across the board. I got him. I wanted them to do their big their big investment in through their IPO through the New York Stock Exchange. So I
Right.
got a meet at the New York Stock Exchange. And it was clear that he was trying to build support for his economic transformation plan, and he wanted the United States involved. He wanted the United States engaged. President Obama actually met with him and had him over at the White House for a meeting. So things were I thought things were going very well,
And
I
you
think
thought it was a genuine desire to reform, not just a
absolutely.
financial incentive.
I'm convinced it was. The way I started with him was when I first got there. The king, Salman, was the crown prince at the
Right.
time.
Right.
The king was Abdullah, who was also a great guy, and I really enjoyed working with him. But King Salman was the crown prince, and he's the one that I principally worked with because he was the sort of the prime minister. And I noticed his son sitting in a couple of meetings far off in the corner, not participating. And so I asked for a meeting with him, and we met. And from that first meeting where we just got to know each other, I realized two things. One, this young man is someday going to be the king of Saudi Arabia.
Mm.
Number one. Number two, because he's ambitious, and he has always been interested in the political and economic development of his country from the time he was a young man. How do I know that? Because I did some background work on him, so I saw it. His other brothers were not necessarily of the same vein, but he was. And that's why his father loved him so much, because his father was a consummate politician and his son was like him. And so we developed a great friendship. And the friendship was, tell each other the truth. I will tell you exactly what I think. I represent the president and my country, and I will tell you exactly what I think. And I expect you not to be polite back. If you don't agree with me, if you're not going to do what I ask you to do, then just tell me, and then we'll negotiate further. And that's the way we worked for the 3 years I was there.
In the sort of limited time we have left, the Jamal Khashoggi murder. I'm curious your thoughts on how the Trump administration responded to that. Initially, Donald Trump kind of saying, I don't know, I just spoke to the king and they say they weren't involved. I believe them. I don't know. Seems pretty reasonable. And then, of course, the more we learned about it, the more we learned about how at the very close to the very top, if not at the very top, they seem to have known exactly what was going on. How do you think that was handled by the Trump administration?
I don't think it was handled well at all. And I think that in some ways, they should have done to some extent what President Biden is doing now. Saying, we're not gonna cut. We can't prove without any doubt that he ordered this. He has publicly said he didn't. That there's a rogue operation. But whatever we know, whatever we understand from it, we're going to have to recalibrate, as President Biden has put it, this relationship. And he didn't do that. Again, there was no real diplomacy going on. There was no effort to really end this war in Yemen in an aggressive way. There was no effort to tone down the ambitions of the Crown Prince. And his ambitions are some of them are personal for his own power and influence,
right?
But many of them are also for his country. And we needed to be sure that we can offset the influence that other countries like China would begin to have. Instead, Trump was focusing only on the sale of military hardware.
Yes.
And I thought that was absolutely wrong.
We've been speaking with former U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Joseph Westphal. I so appreciate your time today, and this will certainly be an issue we will continue discussing.
Wonderful to be with you, David. Thank you very much.